think about the technology we had just 12 years ago. It was really primitive. I was up here on stage with, it was a big molecule. It was, you might remember the story about resveratrol, the red wine molecule. We've come a long way. In those days, we were talking about merely slowing down aging. What I'm going to tell you about today are some huge advances in the field of longevity research, as we call it. Don't call it anti-aging. That's not what we do. We now have the ability in labs like mine and around the world for any high school student in their garage to drive aging in the forwards direction and in reverse. And in the forwards direction and in reverse. We have control over the aging process now. Now, does that mean that we're all going to live for another 1,000 years? I don't know. We will see. But just like the Wright brothers when they took off and had powered flight, we know that it will be possible to build a Concorde. We know it will be possible to extend human lifespan beyond what we can currently even imagine. We know this to be true because the biology, the science, says that it is true. So how many of you would love to live to 100 in a healthy way, vibrant, still have your sense of humor, and look forward to another few decades of life? How many of you want to do that? Okay. I was surprised. Few people didn't raise their hands. So how many of you have a sense of humor, love life, still vibrant, and are about to turn 100? That'd be this man here. Norman Lear. Mr. Norman Lear, it's just been a pleasure to know you, and you're a beacon of hope and inspiration to all of us, that all of us one day will live a life like yours. And you will continue on for decades to come as well. Because this is really personal. It's not about lifespan extension. It's about keeping us all healthier for longer. It turns out when you're healthy and you love life, guess what? You don't die. That's just a nice side effect. So the primary goal, which Mark mentioned, is to stay healthier for longer. It's no different than trying to cure cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. But often because we're trained to think that aging is part of the natural process, we feel like it's, some of us, certainly not me, feel like it's selfish to try and tackle aging. But what is natural anyway? Isn't cancer natural? Alzheimer's, heart disease, these are natural, but we've rallied against those diseases for many hundreds of years, tens of thousands in fact. So why is aging any different? Just because it's common. So in my lab, we have a philosophy. This is how we work. I'm very privileged to work with a bunch of about 20 young scientists who believe that aging is a disease, and that disease is treatable, and that we, in fact, are working on the cure. This is how we work on aging. And this, 20 years ago when I started out as a young postdoc, was heresy. I'm actually surprised that Harvard Medical School gave me a job, because in those days, the idea that you could tackle aging with regular science was considered rather ludicrous. But what happened in the 1990s was that single gene alterations were turning out to dramatically extend the lifespan of just simple species. We worked in yeast at MIT. There were others working in roundworms, little nematodes, and fruit flies, and even mice. It was found that changes to single genes could dramatically extend their lifespan, 30%. In the case of worms, up to 10-fold lifespan extension. And that's when the field really took off. We left behind the idea that free radicals and drinking antioxidants would help us. In fact, they do very little for lifespan. And we targeted those genes. So what do those genes do? I'll tell you about some of them today. But in general, you can think of them as protectors of the body. They come on when we're under threat. If you're hungry, if you exercise, if you take molecules from stressed plants, this is a signal to your body that times could be tough and you better hunker down and try and survive. These are survival genes that give us longevity. And we can tweak them, and I'll tell you how. So things have really changed, of course. I like to look back at history to predict the future. It's not always a good guide, but it's helpful. So in 1900, the most common causes of death were pneumonia, TB, and diarrhea. Okay? In a country like the USA, these are extremely rare, And we take it for granted that we will not die of those things. Not true in the whole world, but we're getting there. One day we will look at the current diseases, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, the major killers of our world today, our time today, and they could be a thing of the past as well. We have the technology, I'm telling you today, to be able to go into our hundreds without worrying about getting cancer in your 70s, heart disease in your 80s, and Alzheimer's in your 90s. This is the world that's coming. It's not really a question of if. It's literally a question of when. And for most of us, it's going to happen in our lifetimes. So that was 1900, where in those days, you'd worry about catching an infection. That was long gone. By 2016, it was cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's. Now, if you project into the future with current medicines, if we don't do anything, we're in real trouble. Even if we cure all cancers today, we're only on average going to live another 2 years. But increasingly, we're spending more of our lives in a decrepit, painful state. And more people are not taking care of their bodies in the way that I'll tell you about. Which means that we're spending more and more of our dollars on sick care. So what do we need to do? We need to protect the entire body from the ravages of aging. In fact, most of the diseases that kill us today are not heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's. These are just names for the effects of aging on the body. 80 to 90% of the diseases that kill us are due to aging. And we're actually just in denial that that is the case. If we address aging, if we reverse aging, these diseases should not happen. And we have evidence now, in my lab at least, that those diseases go away. Because the body is young again and can get rid of those diseases, in animals at least. So the future that I wanted to see for humanity is that we can all look forward to a longer, healthier life and then pass away relatively quickly and economically. So the future in 2060 would be like this. And this is what we can do now in animals quite readily. We see that animals that are given certain diets, supplements, drugs even, live longer, healthier lives and then die relatively quickly. This is what the future is going to be. So one of the big breakthroughs has been a new understanding of why we age. The theory that I have proposed is called the information theory of aging. And it comes from the yeast studies that I was doing in a team at MIT in the 1990s. And we discovered in yeast cells that what was going wrong was a loss of information. Okay? We found that there were mutations in genes called silent information regulators that led to a long life in yeast cells. These are, use them for baking and brewing. And that central word, information, turns out to be critical for understanding why we age and why we don't have to. Now, there are two types of information in the human body and in most life. There's the genome, which we've heard all about. Those are the 4 letters of the DNA code, ACTG for short. That's a digital code. Okay, you're either 1 of 4. And that's represented on this slide by a compact disc, which hopefully all of you still remember what those things were. They were awesome. You could store a whole album on them. The problem with a CD is that there's another type of information that you need, and that's the ability to read the right music, the right digital information at the right time and place. The reader is important. But that reader is analog. It moves around. It's physical. It's not digital. And by that analogy, I think it's clear to understand what's going wrong with aging. What's going wrong is we're not so much losing the digital music in the cell, the genes. We don't lose so much genetic information as we do what we call the epigenetic information, the readers of the information on the genome. Okay, put another way, aging is like scratching up a CD so that you cannot read the music and it's skipping. Now, in biological terms, it looks more like this. This is a nucleus of a cell, a human cell, and those wiggly lines are chromosomes. We have 6 feet of DNA in every cell. Of course, stretches to the moon and back 8 times a lot of it, and it needs to be regulated. And of course, a skin cell doesn't want to turn on the same genes as a brain cell. That would be a problem. So what the cell does is it bundles up some DNA that it doesn't need, so that the skin cell, for the rest of its life, will remember to be a skin cell, and a nerve cell does a different pattern of bundles. And these silent information regulators, these genes that we first worked on in the 1990s, are responsible for bundling up the DNA so that they stay bundled for the lifespan of a yeast cell. And we now know the same is true for a human cell. And with aging, what happens is that those bundles that keep genes silent, that specify how a cell should behave, become untangled. And now genes that were once off when we were young start to come on again. And that means that cells lose their identity and their function. And that, I believe, is why we age, why we get sick, and why most of us die. So two questions we've had in my lab for the last 2 decades. Why does this happen? And can you reverse it? Now, if we zoom up into these bundles of DNA, it looks like this. So the yellow is the DNA, and the protein packaging, these are called histones. These packaging proteins control whether a gene is on or off. And if it's bundled tightly through these silent information regulators, you can see up the top left a bundling process. This is a gene that's off, and a gene that's on is generally opened up, and now the cell can read that DNA. And it's different for each type of cell. It's even different between cells that are next to each other. It's quite complicated. Now, the way the cell does that involves a lot of different proteins, but it also involves some chemical tags that are stuck onto the DNA when we're young, during development as an embryo, and they stay there, in some cases, say, in our nervous system, in the brain, for decades. These chemical tags called methyls, which is just a carbon with 3 hydrogens on it, stay on the DNA for decades and mark which genes should be off and which genes should be on. And what was discovered only about 15 years ago was that these chemicals change, some of them change in a predictable way during aging. And you can measure that. And you can read that and predict how well somebody is aging, what speed they're aging at, and even predict when they're going to die. So these methyl tags are readable. And again, a high school student can do this now, not very cheaply. But we do want to democratize the ability to understand how old you are, because once you have that information, you can act on it. Now, often people say, well, humans shouldn't live that long. We're already living on average 80. Some of us make it beyond 100. But in general, humans just live a long time. How can it be possible to live longer? Well, all you have to do is look at the animal kingdom. There are many species, even ones that are not just plants and sharks, shown here, but even mammals, whales that live over a couple of 100 years. And they're quite similar to us genetically, and biologically and chemically, they're essentially identical. So there's no reason that we couldn't live 200 years in a healthy way. We just need to understand how do those other species do that. And what we see is that those species that live a long time have a very stable epigenome. Those loops and bundles, they are more intact. Whereas in a mouse, which only lives about 2 or 3 years, those bundles and loops that keep cells functioning well become unraveled relatively quickly. So why does this happen? I think we have a good understanding of that. But first of all, let me tell you about how we measure it. So you can take a blood sample or a cheek swab sample, which is what we've done in my lab, and we can actually measure those chemicals and plot where you are relative to an average human being at the same chronological age and give you what's called the biological age. Most of us start out roughly the same age when we're young, but some do the right things. Okay, we know what the things are that slow down aging. Do a bit of exercise, eat well, don't become obese, have good friends, meditate, don't stress. These things are working because they're actually slowing down your aging process. There are also some people who don't do that, and you can read their biological age and they're actually older than the rest. And it turns out those people that are older generally die younger from diseases. So now we have what we refer to as the credit score for our bodies. We have a number that we can give you that tells you how well you're doing, but that's not important unless you can change it, unless you can alter the trajectory. And increasingly, we, as a field of scientists, are learning that there are ways to slow down aging. And even some examples now in the scientific literature of reversing that number, making it go backwards by a number of years. And I predict one day it will be normal to go to a doctor and get a prescription for a medicine that will take you back a decade. So how's this all going to work? I'll tell you. I do want to show you a really interesting study that shows the effects of the epigenome. So epigenome, remember, is the reading of the genes. So why do we think that the epigenome is so important? Well, one thing is you can look at identical twins. These two people, the man has a brother who's an identical twin and the woman has a sister. And these are the twins that looked after themselves, did the right things. And when you look at the identical twin, remember, that has the same genome, same DNA, the epigenome has been altered such that they are aging more rapidly. So if there's one thing you remember from this talk, if there is only one thing, it's that 80% of your aging and your future health is predicted to be in your own hands, is in your control, and how your body reads those genes. We can do this with mice. We can extend mouse, make a mouse age prematurely. In fact, I would like to have somebody come up to the stage. Actually, Governor Baker, can you come up? We need another guinea pig. We would like to age you. Here he comes. Okay. All right, so I don't know. I always like to pick on my state's governor.
Dean came and just said I've been vaccinated, so I'm all set.
Yeah. Well, one day we will vaccinate you against aging. There are ways to do that.
Appreciate that.
So I'm going to lead you out back.
Okay.
Come with me, and then we'll see how you do. Okay. Right. So in a few minutes, we'll see what happens when you age a governor. So these mice have been aged prematurely, but the question was, if you can cause something like aging, can you take it away? And then what we did was we realized through work of many other scientists that you can reset the age of a cell. In fact, you can take the age of a cell back to 0 and make it a stem cell. There are a set of genes called Yamanaka genes that do that. And what we did in my lab was we took a subset of those genes, 3 of them, and those 3 genes that are normally used to make an embryo, when we put them into an adult mouse, actually made the mouse younger. And we used that to restore the function of the optic nerve that had been damaged or old or aged. This was the first finding of a paper that we put out in 2020, showing that when you reverse the age of an optic nerve, it can regenerate. Now, optic nerves don't normally regenerate, only if they're very young. And this was an indication that reversing aging was going to be beneficial to a tissue. But what about normal aging? This is just damage. Damage, by the way, accelerates aging. And what we did was we took regular mice. Don't worry about the poop. That's just part of the stress that the mouse is feeling. But what you shouldn't be seeing is the mouse turning its head. A mouse that can see will turn its head with those lines. And this is a mouse that's blind due to old age. And what we did was we put in these 3 Yamanaka genes that reverse the age of the optic nerve in an old mouse. And lo and behold, its vision was restored back to a young age. And on average, these mice can see like a young mouse. And these mice actually die about 6 months later with great eyesight. So we're working, and many others now in the field have started working on this. We don't just reverse age of the eye. We're working on other parts of the body. We're reversing the spleen, the kidney, the skin. And this work that we published in December 2020 has been part of a really big wave of research into how to control and reverse the epigenome and reverse aging. Now, what happens when you do that? Turns out that you can actually restore the function of tissues. These are mini brains. We call them organoids. And these are taken from people that have had a normal aging brain or have Alzheimer's disease. And we can grow little human brains that get Alzheimer's disease. And we can also measure their electrical activity. You can see with this movie that I took with my iPhone, these nerves are actually, we measure them. And here's the take-home message. We can age those brains up to 70 years old. They lose their ability, they lose their electrical activity. They get inflammation, just like an old brain. They get what looks like Alzheimer's disease. When we reverse the age of those brains, they get their electrical activity back. The inflammation goes away. So what I predict is that when we get better control and eventually full control over aging, we will not only be able to choose how old we are, but we will be able to reverse the diseases that we get when we're older. And this is a totally new way of thinking about medicine. So finally, before we bring out the governor and see how he feels from his aging treatment, I just want to say that you can't optimize what you don't measure. And so what we've been doing in my lab is developing ways to democratize that test that you can measure your age using a cheek swab. We've started a company that we're actually very happy to offer a sneak preview to all of you. We've got a cheek swab that you can pick up on your way out down the hallway here, and you'll be some of the first people in the world to try this test out. It's early days. You'll be part of this experiment as to give yourselves a guide as to whether you've aged normally, faster or slower, and then we will help you do something about it. So what do you do now? I'm asked this every day. So these are some of the things you can do, and you want to stay alive until these medicines become more freely available, but there's kind of things that work, we know, are to don't eat a regular American diet. 3 meals a day, certainly for middle-aged people like myself, is too much. I tend to eat 1 main meal a day. Do lose your breath. So exercise we know is good. You only need between 10 and 30 minutes 3 times a week to get your body feeling as though it's in adversity conditions. You want to mimic adversity, remember. You maintain your muscle mass. You don't want to break your hips. You want, especially for men, you want to maintain that testosterone. So big muscles, especially your legs and your back, is helpful. Use feedback, cheek swab devices. These all help. What you measure is very helpful. Sleep well, reduce stress. I think probably everyone in this room has to work on those. And eat plants that have been stressed. So finally, I want to recommend eating plants that are stressed out, because though they make molecules like resveratrol from red wine, but there are others that plants make when they're stressed out, and they give our bodies this adversity sensation. We can give some of these molecules to mice. This one's called NMN, which activates the sirtuins, these silent inflammation regulators, gets rid of those scratches. And one of these mice has been drinking NMN in the water. You can see one of them is doing better. If you guessed that it's the mouse on the right, you'd be wrong. And so we've got clinical trials now with this molecule that look really promising, including an increase in strength in human subjects. Someone once said that the mouse on the right is actually more intelligent because it's getting the heck out of there. So yeah, I do want to just emphasize that it is possible to maintain or reverse your age. This is data showing that over a number of years, it's possible to have biomarkers that get younger, ostensibly younger. For ease, I'm showing you my data. So over the last 10 years, I've been ostensibly getting younger, not older. And then finally, just as a beacon of hope, I want to highlight my father, who's now 82, almost 83, who has no diseases, is vibrant, and seems to himself be getting younger every year, and is on a similar program to me that is in my book if you want more information about that. And I think that when Norman was 80, I'm sure he was just as vibrant and healthy and loving life as my father did. And that's the other point. It's not about living to 200, it's about being healthy for longer and not worrying about getting those diseases that often take our family members and ourselves away. And I want to thank you for listening, but we want to bring Governor Baker out and see how he's doing as a regular 80-year-old, not a Norman Lear 80-year-old who plays tennis and runs around, but an 80-year-old regular guy. Here he is. Welcome Governor Baker onto the stage as an older person. So this suit is designed to mimic what it can feel like if you don't take care of yourself. All right. All right, he's giving me that look like, what the heck have you done to me, David? All right, so what I want you to tell the crowd is, you've only been in this for, 10 minutes at most.
I can't hear a word you're saying. I can barely see you.
I didn't anticipate that one. Okay, let's give you a hearing back, which we think we can do with our technology. All right, so you can hear us? Hello?
I can hear you.
All right. So this is actually not supposed to be funny. This is supposed to be very serious, to give people who have not yet experienced aging an idea of what it feels like. So would you like to tell everybody, what does it feel like to get older?
Well, let me just say one thing first of all, which is my father turns 94 on June 21st. And he actually made it all the way through COVID in pretty good shape. And in the past year or so, his eyesight, used to read 3 newspapers a day and all the rest. He used to quiz me on whether or not I was doing a good job. And this thing, right? I have a whole new appreciation for, he can't really see now, and his hearing is going, and he is very, and so am I and my brothers, sad about where he sits. And honestly, until I had to walk out here like this, it was hard for me to appreciate the loss that we're talking about here. This is like...
These are heavy weights, by the way.
Yeah, they're really heavy.
Don't go for a swim right now.
And, you know, the first thing I figured out when I had this on was, if you start to fall, I mean, you're going to fall, and you're going to hurt yourself in a pretty serious way.
Yeah.
This is actually, I know this wasn't your intent, but this is really going to change the way I'm going to think about how I interact and deal with my dad, and I'm going to talk to my brothers about it as well. So you've made a real contribution to us.
Thank you.
This is no way to live, honestly. I mean, when you put these things on, literally the world just goes away.
Yeah. So it's a serious matter. And I think that the future doesn't have to be the way we think it's going to be. And it's not going to be. We have to rethink the arc of our lives. And we're going to be able to one day take these suits off and go back to how we once were. And those diseases and this pain and the weight and the loss of senses is curable. So I want to thank Governor Baker for being a good sport again.
Thank you.
We'll bring on the next speaker.
Everybody, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah.